The day began quietly at Highgrove Estate. Mist still clung to the hedgerows, the dew soaking the rose petals with a delicate shimmer. Inside the grand but aging halls of the estate, Lord Alistair Pembroke stirred his tea twice before setting, the spoon down gently, as if any disruption might disturb the fragile calm of the monarchy itself. A man who had built a career on silence, precision, and knowing exactly when to speak, Alistair now stared at his personal email inbox, one unread message flashing like a warning siren. He adjusted his reading glasses and opened the message. It was from the Royal Events Office, a simple scheduling memo. But as his eyes scanned the screen, the date jumped out at him like a snake in the grass. His cup paused mid-air. 2 birthday events, 1 garden, same time. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Prince Frederick of Norfolk, or rather, Frederick. Charles Arthur Lionel was turning 34. Known for his tousled blonde hair, sharp tongue, and preference for whiskey over protocol, Frederick was the rebellious jewel of the Windsor cousins. He had once called a paparazzo a goblin with a lens and refused to bow during a Commonwealth ceremony. Still, he had charm, and the press adored him. His birthday, Alistair remembered, was meant to be a quiet military-style garden luncheon with former colleagues from his brief but dramatic stint in the Royal Army. But then there was Lady Isobel. Barely 21, the social media darling of the lesser Windsor line. Daughter of Lord Henry and the late Lady Arabella, Isobel had inherited both her mother's elegance and her father's bite. Her team had been planning a pastel-themed birthday, brunch with a vegan cake, harpist, and the launch of her cruelty-free cosmetics line. Her event had been scheduled for the East Garden, the same East Garden Frederick's team had booked. Alistair stood up, abandoning his tea. This wasn't just a scheduling conflict. It was a family minefield. He paced the study, past a black-and-white photo of Queen Elizabeth and a faded letter from Winston Churchill. He reached for the landline, he still preferred it over a mobile, and dialed Lord Henry first. Lord. Henry answered quickly, his voice as sharp as ever. Alistair explained the overlap gently, choosing his words as if walking on broken glass. Lord Henry responded with disbelief, followed by offence. He accused Frederick of deliberately hijacking the date. Alistair assured him it was a mistake, but Henry's response was cold. He made it clear that his daughter would not be moving. Her event, not for Frederick, not for anyone. Next, Alistair dialed Frederick. The prince answered mid-laugh, somewhere between gym and cigar. When Alistair explained the mix-up, Frederick did not flinch. He simply chuckled, poured himself a drink, and declared that the garden is large enough for both birthdays. Let the guests choose where the fun is. Alistair closed his eyes. Of course Frederick would say that. The truth was, these 2 family branches had been quietly at odds for years. It went back to a scandal involving a military charity overseen by Lord Henry. Frederick, then serving in the same regiment, had raised concerns about missing funds. A quiet inquiry had occurred. No charges had followed. But the frost between them never melted. Even in public appearances, Henry stood apart, and Isobel never once acknowledged Frederick on social media, despite their shared lineage. Now, the palace was about to host both their birthdays in the same space, the East Garden at Windsor, in what could easily erupt into a passive-aggressive war disguised with napkins and champagne. Alistair spent the next 12 hours coordinating damage control. He called the events office. Too late. Both teams had placed non-refundable orders. Tents, flowers, personalized signage, even 2 separate sound systems. There was no time to reschedule, and no desire on either side to concede. By Thursday, the tabloids caught wind. Double trouble at Windsor, one headline teased. Whose party will reign? Another asked. Alistair sighed at his desk, sifting through floor plans of the garden. He decided to draw an invisible line down the middle. West Garden to Frederick, East Garden to Isobel. 2 stages, 2 entrances, 2 security teams. It was a ridiculous solution, but it was the only one he had. That night, he called Lady Meredith, the palace's longest-serving event hostess, for reinforcement. She had once managed Diana's post-divorce gala and was known for making chaos look like choreography. She agreed to oversee guest arrivals. The next day, deliveries arrived in waves. Frederick's side came with cigar stands, a brass quartet, and cocktail lounges. Isobel's team brought crystal glasses, a cruelty-free dessert truck, and pastel bunting spelling her name in cursive. Even the floral arrangements were at war. Frederick's roses were red and defiant. Isobel's lilies were soft pink and impossibly delicate. On the eve of the birthday event, Alistair stood in the center of the garden. The dividing line, though imaginary, felt like a fault line. He watched as staff rehearsed the dual entrances and photographers tested angles. He whispered to himself that this might actually work. But deep down, he knew the truth. Royal blood ran cold when old grudges surfaced, and with both Lord Henry and Frederick set to give toasts just 30 feet apart, it wouldn't take more than one awkward glance or drunken laugh to start a storm. He walked back into the estate and shut the door behind him. Tomorrow, everything would be tested. Not just the garden logistics, but the invisible threads holding this fractured family together. And somewhere in California, far from the storm he was managing, another spark was preparing to light up, the royal fuse. But for now, all Alistair could do was hope the 2 parties stayed on their side of the garden, and that the guests, at least, would pretend not to notice the silent war blooming among the roses. The morning of the event arrived, cloaked in anticipation. Windsor's East Garden, usually a space reserved for curated serenity, now throbbed with competing pulses of activity. It began at dawn when the first delivery vans rolled through the wrought iron gates, escorted by uniformed staff attempting to keep tempers and traffic under control. Lord Alistair Pembroke was already on site, pacing the gravel walkway with 2 phones in hand and a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. He had hardly slept the night before. The garden, though spacious and beautifully kept, was never designed for 2 separate royal events to unfold simultaneously. The dividing line he had imagined now needed to become practical reality. He positioned temporary hedge walls between the west and east ends, erected signage in gold cursive script, and instructed both catering teams to operate under complete silence when near the other side. It was a choreography of diplomacy, and the slightest misstep could unravel it all. Frederick arrived first. He stepped out of a vintage Rolls-Royce, dressed in a navy suit slightly unbuttoned, a pair of sunglasses shielding his sharp eyes despite the overcast sky. Behind him, a small entourage of rugby mates and army friends carried boxes of personalized cigars, whiskey bottles, and Bluetooth speakers. He didn't acknowledge the staff who bowed. He simply nodded at Alistair once, then walked across the gravel like he owned it. He took his place at the western fountain, the one flanked by stone lions. There, his team began to set up what looked more like a gentleman's club than a birthday. Bar carts, dark wood furniture, a jazz trio tuning their instruments. Frederick reached for a drink before the clock even struck 10. An hour later, Lady Isobel made her entrance. She arrived in a pale pink convertible, wearing a cream dress that matched her peonies. Her team of stylists, PR handlers, and digital photographers followed like birds in formation. She stepped out gracefully, waved toward a few early arriving guests, and made her way to the floral canopy erected near the east hedge. Her staff had laid out pastel seating, champagne flutes with sugared rims, and silk fans for guests should the weather turn warm. Alistair observed both sides from a bench positioned between the invisible dividing line. He rubbed his temple, watching, as the guests began to trickle in, then pause in uncertainty. Some clutched their invites and glanced between the 2 parties, unsure of where to go. A few guests, unaware of the family tensions, wandered freely between camps, sipping cocktails from both bars and posting cheerful photos. But most chose sides. Lord Henry arrived late, as expected. He was dressed in a dark coat with silver buttons, and walked with a cane carved from Italian walnut. His face carried the weight of old battles, and his eyes locked with Frederick's across the garden for just a second. Frederick tilted his glass in mock salute. Lord Henry turned his back deliberately and joined Isobel beneath the canopy. Then came the speeches. Frederick insisted on beginning his before noon. He clinked a fork against his glass and turned toward his group, lifting his voice with the confidence of a man who never doubted he would be heard. He spoke about loyalty, about soldiers, about the kind of friendship that isn't captured by Instagram stories. He made a small joke about influencer birthdays and how they required more filters than memories. The laughter from his camp was loud, pointed. Alistair, hearing it from across the garden, closed his eyes. Isobel's speech came 20 minutes later. She stood beneath the canopy, camera lights glinting off her earrings. She thanked her late mother, honored her charity work, and then, in a barely veiled jab, thanked her guests for choosing authenticity over aristocratic affectation. Her words were met with applause and one or two deliberate glances toward Frederick's camp. That was the moment it all began to crack. One of Frederick's friends, Hugh Bainsford, a former Marine-turned-security consultant, made his way toward Isobel's party. He had spotted Lydia Vale, Isobel's best friend, and a known tabloid magnate, sitting near the champagne tower. Hugh, known for his unchecked bravado and tequila-flavored breath, decided to say hello. What began as harmless flirtation turned sour within minutes. Lydia, sensing the eyes of several cameras, rejected his approach with a flick of her hair and a barbed comment about middle-aged men reliving military fantasies. Hugh, not one to take an insult lightly, laughed in her face and knocked over a glass as he turned around. The sound of crystal shattering pierced the soft background harp music. Isobel stood up. Lord Henry stood up. Alistair sprang from the bench. Frederick, upon seeing Hugh return, flustered and mumbling, walked across the boundary line without hesitation. The crowd shifted. Phones were raised. Guests turned. Frederick approached Alistair first, calmly asking whether this arrangement was still working. Alistair, trying to defuse, raised both palms and began to speak, but Lord Henry interrupted. He demanded Frederick remove his men. Frederick responded not with words, but by calling over 2 more of his guests to come, enjoy the sunshine. Tension thickened like fog. Even the staff stopped moving. Then a drone flew overhead. Nobody claimed it, not Frederick's camp, not Isobel's team. But it hovered with a quiet buzz, circling just high enough to capture the entire unfolding disaster. Alistair ordered it down. A security guard scrambled with a jammer. The drone fell into the bushes with a thud. That was the cue. The press was watching now. Alistair turned toward Frederick, and then to Lord Henry. He reminded them, without saying it, that their family's dignity, or what was left of it, was being recorded in real time. It was a battle not of fists, but optics. Frederick relented first. He raised both hands and announced that his camp would move toward the North Terrace. "Let the influencers have their moment," he muttered before turning back. His guests followed, grumbling. Hugh threw a last glance toward Lydia, who smiled triumphantly. Isobel remained seated, arms crossed. She looked toward her father, who gave her a small nod of approval. Then she turned back to her guests, resumed her posture, and smiled as if nothing had happened. But nothing was the same. That evening, photos flooded the tabloids. "Royal birthday meltdown," one read. "Family feud erupts at Windsor Garden," declared another. Social media lit up with clips of the shattered glass, the drone's fall, and the visible coldness between the branches of royalty. Alistair sat alone in the empty garden after sunset, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence, and stared at the trail of crushed petals left by guests. The flowers were beautiful, but trampled. Much like the event. He knew this wasn't over. There would be phone calls. There would be internal reviews. But worse, there would be whispers. Whispers in corridors of power, in press rooms, across dining tables. The kind that could last years. And as he took one final drag from his cigarette, he thought of California. Because while this mess played out in Windsor, across the ocean, another story was brewing. And it wasn't just a headline. It was a video, one that would light the match again. The sun over Malibu stretched across the shoreline like a golden ribbon, pulling the day into motion with a lazy grace that only California seemed to command. At the heart of that coastal calm sat a villa carved into the cliffs, a fusion of glass, stone, and soft, echoing silence. Inside, Meghan Markle, now operating publicly as Margot Everly for her commercial ventures, moved through the marble hallway, barefoot, a robe cinched casually at her waist, and a mug of mint tea in hand. She was due to shoot a lifestyle segment that morning for As Ever, her still controversial but undeniably stylish wellness brand. The campaign was called Unfiltered. The concept was simple. Moments of spontaneous, playful energy meant to reflect the raw authenticity behind the products. The marketing team had flown in from New York. The set designers had arranged gauzy curtains, wildflowers, and soft throw pillows. It all looked perfectly candid, which of course meant it had taken 5 hours to stage. Meghan arrived on set just before 10 a.m. Her hair was already done, makeup light but flawless. She greeted the crew with a smile, asked about breakfast, and cracked a joke that made the sound technician laugh a little too loud. Then she walked to the center of the room, looked around, and clapped her hands once, ready to begin. The director, a Brooklyn-based documentarian named Sasha, encouraged her to move naturally, to feel the music. Someone connected to Bluetooth. The speaker pulsed with a rhythmic beat. Meghan bobbed her head. She laughed. She turned toward one of the stylists and mimed a dramatic over-the-shoulder dance move. Then, without thought, she dropped into a light twerk, just for a second. It was playful, self-deprecating. Everyone laughed. She did it again. Someone cheered. One of the production assistants raised a phone. Just a quick clip, she had told herself. Something to post to the brand's private WhatsApp group. A behind-the-scenes moment, but the phone didn't stay private. Within 2 hours, the clip had made its way onto a junior intern's Instagram story. From there, it was screen-recorded, edited, and recaptioned. By evening, the video had exploded across TikTok, Twitter, and entertainment blogs. It was 15 seconds long. Meghan, laughing, twirling, and then twerking to a pop remix in the sunlight of her Malibu villa. The caption that accompanied the leak read, "Duchess of Twerk? Meghan shakes off the royals in Malibu." At first she didn't notice. It was only after lunch, when her phone began buzzing non-stop, that she checked. There were 3 missed calls from her agent, a dozen texts from journalists she didn't even remember giving her number to. When she finally opened Twitter, her name was trending at number 2, just behind a global climate summit. She sat down on the edge of her bed and watched the video. It didn't seem scandalous. Not really, but she knew exactly how it would play. Not just in the British tabloids, but inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. Harry found out while walking the dogs. He had just returned to the house, phone in hand, when he saw the video circulating in a group chat with old friends. At first, he didn't react. Then he played it again, then again. His shoulders stiffened. He said nothing. When he walked into the living room, Meghan looked up from her laptop. Their eyes met. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked where the clip had come from. She explained what happened. She said it was harmless. He rubbed the back of his neck, pacing silently toward the window. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the inevitable storm. By the time night fell, the headlines had gone global. Former Royal goes rogue, again. Meghan Markle twerking in Malibu. Empowerment or embarrassment? Palace sources shocked by new video leak. Piers Morgan had already written a column. In it, he called the clip "narcissism disguised as feminism" and accused Meghan of deliberately trying to overshadow the Windsor birthday events, which were still fresh in the public's mind after their own PR fiasco. But it wasn't just Piers. Several senior editors at London's largest outlets reached out to royal commentators for quotes. One unnamed source from the palace called the moment deeply inappropriate for someone who once held a royal title. Another described it as a calculated cultural jab. The storm was officially underway. Back in Malibu, Harry sat in the study. The light was low. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Old friends, family he hadn't spoken to in months. A few defended them. Others didn't. He didn't blame Meghan, not really. He blamed the constant dissection of their lives, the inability to escape the royal frame even years after stepping back. And yet, he couldn't stop wondering if she'd known what would happen. Whether, deep down, she'd felt the electricity of rebellion. Whether the dance wasn't just for the camera but for herself. Meghan didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't remove the clip, even though her team begged her to. Instead, she posted a single quote on her Instagram story. "A woman dancing is only shameful when her joy threatens your illusion of control." The post received over 4 million views in the first hour. The internet was split. Some hailed her as fearless. Others saw it as a final nail in the coffin of royal decorum. Feminist commentators debated the symbolism. Conservative pundits decried the optics. And in the middle of it all, the birthday debacle in Windsor was swiftly forgotten. Lord Alistair, seated in a private club in London, read the headlines over his whiskey. He realized, not for the first time, that Meghan's power didn't lie in her statements. It lay in her existence. In the fact that, no matter how far she moved from the throne, she still controlled the narrative. Somewhere in Kensington, an emergency meeting was held with palace media consultants. An internal memo was drafted. No comment at this time. But inside those old stone walls, tempers flared. Frederick, now stewing over the fact that his garden scandal had been buried under a California twerk, sent a snide message to his cousin. Harry didn't respond. The royal family had once again been pulled into Meghan's orbit, and as the clip reached 200 million views, one thing became clear. She hadn't stolen the spotlight. She was the spotlight, and the rest of them, no matter how royal their blood or how ancient their estates, were simply trying to survive the glow. The morning after, the storm was unusually quiet. Malibu, for all its glow and glamour, had the capacity to feel detached from the rest of the world, almost suspended above consequence. But inside the Montecito estate, silence carried a different weight. Prince Harry stood in the kitchen, barefoot, on cold tile, staring at the toaster, as if it might explain something. A piece of toast popped. He didn't move. The twerk video had now surpassed 300 million views. Meghan hadn't brought it up again. She moved through the house with practiced calm, attending calls for as ever, reviewing campaign feedback, sipping smoothies, and adjusting to the noise that always came when she existed freely. But Harry wasn't floating above it. He felt it, everywhere, in the headlines, in the group chats, in the strained calls from back home that he hadn't answered. He took his coffee black that day, drank it on the terrace, and listened to the birds. For a brief moment, he let himself believe that this would blow over, that this would be like every other media cycle. But as he opened his inbox and scanned through a fresh batch of international headlines, he knew this time felt different. The palace hadn't issued a formal statement. That much was expected. But silence from them wasn't peace. It was pressure. And it was building. In London, Lord Alistair Pembroke stood before a row of portraits in a private Windsor briefing room, tapping a silver pen against his folder. He'd been summoned that morning by senior advisors to help contain the media damage. The briefing had begun with formal updates about the dual birthday fallout, then moved, inevitably, to the California video. one of the communications aides, suggested that the family acknowledge the moment with dignity and forward momentum. Another proposed quietly releasing positive stories about William and Catherine's latest charity engagements to steer the media back to safer waters. But then, a third aide, younger and more direct, asked the question everyone else avoided. What to why, if she wanted this to happen? Alastair didn't answer. He turned to the window instead, watching the drizzle streak down the glass. It was possible. Meghan had always been a master of media rhythms, but whether it was intentional or not didn't matter. What mattered was perception, and the perception now, both online and within the quiet chambers of royalty, was that the institution had once again lost control. Back in Montecito, Harry received a message. It was from Frederick. Not a call, just a text. 5 words. You win again, California Queen. Harry put the phone down. He walked to the edge of the property, where the hedges fell away to reveal the ocean. The horizon stretched endlessly, a line between worlds he had tried and failed to separate. He had given up titles, roles, duties, but the expectations still clung to him. People still called him Prince, still watched him like he was standing at a podium, even when he was just walking his dog or pushing Archie's stroller. He hadn't spoken to William in weeks. The last call had ended curtly, with long silences and phrases like, "You knew what you were doing." Catherine had tried to keep things polite, but even her words felt curated. Harry had once believed that distance might mend things. Now he saw that space only gave room for wounds to deepen in private. He walked back inside and found Meghan in her office. She was reviewing footage, giving notes, laughing with someone on speakerphone. He paused at the door. She looked up, caught his eye, and offered a small smile. He didn't return it. That night, the royal crisis shifted again. An unverified but persuasive leak emerged online, claiming that senior palace figures were privately furious over Meghan's behavior and had begun discussing new protocols for all extended family members, regardless of whether they remained working royals. The idea, it said, was to establish firmer boundaries on who could speak, post, or represent themselves with implied royal influence. The story spread like fire. Critics accused the palace of censorship. Meghan's supporters labeled it a witch hunt. Even neutral voices began questioning whether the monarchy understood modern optics at all. In response, Meghan posted nothing, but her silence wasn't absence, it was posture. She had already made her move. The clip had already won the public's attention, fractured the palace's confidence, and reminded the world that the so-called outsiders still had the louder voice. Alastair, now stationed in Balmoral for seasonal duties, drafted a quiet memo that night. It advised against further escalation. It encouraged restraint. He ended it with one sentence: "Let the silence say what statements cannot." But inside the palace, silence had begun to breed division. Frederick, emboldened by the attention drawn away from his birthday feud, began speaking more openly about reforming the brand of the monarchy. He suggested more transparency, more authenticity, even if it came at the cost of control. Lord Henry, on the other hand, was livid. He blamed Meghan for diluting royal dignity and turning sacred traditions into spectacle. The family's group chat, once used sparingly for holiday arrangements, became a digital battleground. Harry remained quiet. He read everything. He watched the nightly news anchors dissect the scandal with smiles. He saw Meghan's face looped across television panels. And he did nothing until the email came. It wasn't from a tabloid or an aide. It was from someone older, someone from his past life. A former royal guard, retired now, who once shadowed Harry during his early 20s. The message was brief. "Remember who you were before they told you who to be. You're not lost. You just stopped pretending." Harry read it twice, then again. It didn't offer a solution, but it offered clarity. The next morning, He walked into Meghan's office. She was sipping tea, reading the latest stats on her new product line. He told her he wanted to leave town for a while, not for the press, not for the palace, but for himself. She didn't argue. She simply asked where. He didn't know yet. But he would find out. By week's end, the video had begun to fade from trending lists. A new scandal in European politics had taken the spotlight. The media moved on. But within the palace, the impact lingered. Like perfume in a room, long after. The wearer had gone. In Malibu, the sun still shone. The garden was quiet. And Meghan once again walked barefoot through her home, at peace, or something like it. And Harry, somewhere between memory and future, stood at a crossroads he hadn't named yet. The monarchy watched in silence, and for the first time in years, it realized it might not be the one writing history anymore.